Hey guys, it's the Tyrant here, and I have a fun fact and shocking realization here for you today. Right now, the Halo franchise here in 2016 is officially older than the original Super Mario Bros. Game was back when Halo first came along. Yep, it's true. Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System was first released back in 1985, the same year I was born. Halo Combat Evolved, on the other hand, debuted for Apple back in the year 2000. Now, to be fair, all we really saw was a demo, and it wasn't released to the public until a year later after Bungie teamed up with Microsoft and became a console game. A2, Bungie, A2. But still, it's hard to believe that Halo was first showcased 16 years ago. And if you're like me and you grew up in the late 80s and straight into the 90s, the console scene went through some major evolutionary changes back then. For me personally, I started out with Nintendo. Then, when Sega came into the picture, Nintendo upped its game by going the Super route. Meanwhile, a lesser-known console known as the TurboGrafx-16 fought hard to earn its place on the market. But despite releasing some really amazing content, they just couldn't keep up with the two console giants. However, when Sony decided to enter the picture, Sega started to sweat a little bit. Nintendo didn't have too much trouble with their N64 being a fun alternative to the PlayStation, but Sega Saturn just didn't cut it. And finally, Microsoft entered the picture with the Xbox, and Sega's Dreamcast just couldn't compete anymore. And what's funny is after Sega dropped out of the picture, the console wars have pretty much been a steady three-way race. Not much else has changed. And more so, you're probably wondering, why the hell am I bringing this up when this is supposed to be a video about Halo? Evolution, my friends. Today I want to take you through the course of Halo's evolution and why the series went from being a revolutionary franchise to falling towards the wayside. And in case you're wondering, no, this is not a video bashing the newer games or 343 Industries taking it over. In fact, if you'd like to see how I rank the games, don't forget to check out both my Halo Time Travel and Evolution video, where I rank all of the major Halo titles, as well as my Halo 5 Drunken review. If you're watching this on a mobile device, I've placed links in the description as well. What I want to do for you is over the course of the next few videos show you how Halo, a once evolutionary and iconic symbol in the gaming world, slowly became what it is today. And like Nintendo and Sega, it's not always the product to blame, but rather the world that continues to form around it. We're going to kick things off with what every good structure needs, and that's a foundation. And the foundation for Halo, of course, is the very first game, Halo Combat Evolved. Now, it's important to know right off the bat that Halo already had a lot going for it right out of the box. It served as a launch title for Microsoft's very first console and a new generation for gaming. This was the game that people saw when they were trying out this new introduction into the console wars. So odds are, if you purchased an original Xbox, Halo was going to be on that list of games somewhere. And when my brother first described it to me, I was less than impressed. I mean, I'd played first-person shooters before, and while I always found them fun for a little while, they eventually got repetitive and dull. You see, back when I was growing up, the term FPS to me brought to mind games like Doom and Quake for the PC, 007 GoldenEye and Turok for the console, and for those of you who actually remember this game, Ice and Fire for the Apple Macintosh. Then I finally got a chance to play it. Now, I'll admit, right off the bat, I wasn't immediately impressed just because of the first closed-in mission, the Pillar of Autumn. I mean, sure, the graphics were miles ahead of what I'd been used to. They were smooth and fluid rather than all blocky and tank-like. At least I gave it that much credit, but I mean, only being able to carry two weapons at once? What the hell was this abomination? Then I set foot on the Halo ring for the first time. That moment right there was the moment that would change my entire perspective of gaming forever. The thing is, Bungie only credits themselves for coming up with a 30-second formula that players love to repeat. Run, gun, and grenades. But it was so much more than that. Now, it wasn't necessarily that Halo brought any real brand new standalone elements to the table. Most of what we've seen in Halo we've seen before in some shape or form in another game. No. It was what they brought in and how perfectly they made those elements work together. Prior to Halo, I was generally accustomed to first-person shooters having lots of tight, repetitive corridors. And sure, while GoldenEye had a few outdoor missions where you could roam around, what it lacked was atmosphere and character. But when you were on Halo, you were truly on a different and organic world. But it didn't just stop with environments and how vastly different and immense they were from mission to mission. It was also the life in those missions. And of course, I'm talking about the Covenant, the Flood, and the Sentinels. Never before had I seen enemies that were faction-based and could work together to take on you, or even another entirely different faction. This wasn't the simple arcade-style shooter I was used to. This was an actual interstellar war. And while at first I was unimpressed with the tools I was given in which to fight this war, I learned to love them quickly. It's still hard to believe there was once a time I actually complained about only being able to hold two weapons at once, when really that was a key dynamic that made the game so much fun. It forced you to strategize and look at each battle individually rather than think you could simply waltz right into any battle like a tank and just hose your way through. And though the weapon selection in the original game was small, you really had everything you needed. For the humans, you had the pistol as your standard close to medium range headshot weapon, the assault rifle as your arbitrary machine gun, the shotgun for close quarter domination, the sniper rifle for long range, and your ultimate power weapon, the rocket launcher. On the alien side, you had the seemingly weak plasma pistol. That is, until you learned that an overcharged shot could knock out an elite shields instantly, that is. You had the rapid fire plasma rifle, which combined with the original Halo's plasma stun effect could be very effective weapons. And finally, there was the Needler, which, believe it or not, if you knew how to use it properly, could be utilized like a homing grenade launcher. And there were only two types of grenades in the game, but really that's all you needed. The frag grenade had the biggest boom, and the plasma grenade could stick to enemies for an insta-kill. You also had two power-up variants, active camouflage to make you invisible for a short period of time, and an overshield to allow you to take extra damage. Vehicles were limited to the Warthog, Ghost, Scorpion tank, and Banshee, and no, I'm not counting the Wraith because you couldn't use it back in Halo 1. But again, considering this was only supposed to introduce you to the next generation of gaming, this again was really all you needed. But the succulent, creamy filling was the story, and who can argue with that? I had never seen a first-person shooter take such pride in their storytelling. It was like watching a mysterious sci-fi Hollywood-grade production. I'd never seen anything like this in a video game before. The mystery, the music, the plot twists, the characters, all to this day remain to be iconic and unforgettable. This was a time, remember, when multiplayer, as fun as it was and had a very diverse palette of maps and game types, was still just an afterthought compared to the campaign itself. In fact, to this day, the series has yet to come out with another game where both the gameplay and the storyline are both off the charts and equally complement each other really well. I mean, honestly, in every game we've had since the original, it always tends to lean either more one way or more the other way, but they were never equal to each other. And little did I know at the time that Bungie Studios and Microsoft were just getting started. Hey, what's up guys? It is the Tyrant here once again, continuing where we left off with the rise and fall of Halo. Today's topic of discussion is Halo 2. And I know what you're all thinking. Oh, come on, Tyrant. Please don't tell me you're going to smear my favorite game all over again. This is becoming like an annual tradition for you. Relax, don't worry. Even though most of my Legacy subscribers know that Halo 2 isn't exactly my favorite in the series, today I want to focus on all of the good Halo 2 did and why the series would have never been as good without it. In fact, believe it or not, most of my qualms with Halo 2 come from the fact that time constraints and hardware limitations are what ultimately kept it from becoming the ultimate Halo experience. Had Microsoft allowed Bungie more time, or dare I say it, made Halo 2 the launch title for the Xbox 360, they would have solved both those issues right off the bat. But how about the game we did receive from Bungie? Right out of the box, I have to acknowledge that when it comes to the standalone story of Halo 2, Bungie couldn't have hit it more on the nose. That is, as long as we're not factoring in the cliffhanger ending.
Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
Now remember in my last video how much I talked about how much I cherish the story of the original game. Well, as it turns out, Halo 2 pretty much followed nearly the exact same formula and even gave us a brief backstory. My theory is this. Because Halo 2 was being released so late in the Xbox's life cycle, Microsoft knew that a lot more people had Xboxes now, and because of that, and surrounding all the hype of Halo 2, for many, this would be their very first Halo experience. So let's draw some parallels here. Both games begin with a mission taking place on a UNSC spacecraft, and your enemies mainly consist of grunts and elites. Once that mission is done, you move on to the surface of an organic world. In the first game, that was Halo. In Halo 2, it was Earth. You then spend the third mission of both games trying to get aboard a Covenant ship. See where I'm going with this? As the games progress, the Flood accidentally get released and are fought heavily by Forerunner's technology. The goal soon turns to finding the Index to activate the ring, only to come across the realization of Halo's true purpose, and finally the ultimate goal is to stop the ring from being activated and the plan ultimately succeed. Yeah, spoiler alert. So as you can see, while Halo 2 has a few deviating plot points, the games for the most part are very much the same. The difference? Well, that's where the true rise of Halo begins, my friends. Now, we could sit here and talk about how the musical score was cranked up to 11, or how the character dynamics truly shined, but that's not what always makes a great game. That might work great for movies, but video games need the mechanics and the experience to stand out. And this is the major place where Halo 2 exceeds its predecessor. Keep in mind, in the last video I mentioned that Halo Combat Evolved was the launch game for the original Xbox and served as more of a field test to showcase to gamers exactly what the next generation of consoles could do. We were fairly limited in terms of what weapons and vehicles we could use, and Halo 2 sought to expand that universe. Right off the bat, we could use things that we saw in Halo 1 but couldn't really use to our advantage. Of course, I'm talking about the powerful fuel rod cannon, the deadly energy sword, and of course the menacing Wraith. Heck, that right there was the most I really wanted out of Halo 2, but Bungie took it even further by expanding the overall selection. On the human side, we saw a bit of a trade-off. The assault rifle and the classic pistol were scrapped in favor of the SMG and the now ever so popular Halo 2 battle rifle. They did technically have the Halo 2 Magnum available as well, just in case you're one to love the concept of a sidearm. They even gave the rocket launcher a homing upgrade. I mean, how badass is that? And of course, for vehicles, the all-new Gauss Warthog quickly became a fan favorite, and to this day is certainly one of mine. Now, in addition to what I've already mentioned about the Covenant arsenal, we gained the new Powerhouse Carbine, which, believe it or not, was the one weapon in the game that was most like the pistol in Halo 1. We got the Beam Rifle, which was basically a sniper rifle you never had to reload as long as you remember to pace your shots, and the wall-bouncing grenade launcher we now come to know as the Halo 2 Brute Shot and have never seen since. We even had a brute answer to the plasma rifle, Red and Rapid Fire. They even added the Spectre to counter the UNSC Warthog, which may have not really been much, but I still used it from time to time. And technically you could use the Covenant Shadow in the second mission. You couldn't drive it, but you could use the cannon if you had the daring ability to get on board. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, you could even use the Sentinel Beam along with its blue-colored counterpart. Speaking of weapons, did I mention you could trade them with your allies? Giving them extreme power weapons and infinite ammo? I mean, come on! And that was one thing I forgot to mention in the last video that I really wanted to bring up. The concept of allies was something I'd always wanted in the game. I never liked the concept of having to fight alone, and Halo not only worked to change that dynamic, but with the added weapon swap and the ability to actually drive vehicles, they made them so much more relevant in Halo 2. But let's face it, what good are some of those weapons without the concept of dual wielding? That's right, you could now hold two guns at once, and they didn't even have to be the same gun. You could mix and match at your own will. That I loved, and it's still a dynamic that I miss today. But even as great as all those things are, the main mechanic that has stood the test of time in the Halo series is the ability to board vehicles and either kick out the driver completely or just toss in a grenade and blow the whole thing to pieces. I mean, how cool is that? I had never seen a game where you could pull that off before. This was just one more way to show that Halo was well ahead of its time and other developers were frantically crawling around trying to find ways to compete with it. But we still haven't gotten to the best part yet. The core of the adrenaline and the excitement for most Halo fans came in the form of, and here we go, drumroll please, Halo being available on Xbox Live. It's not that split screen was bad or anything, but finally being able to have your own screen to yourself for those big team battles and getting the chance to play with both friends and strangers all across the world with the addition of matchmaking, this took Halo 2 a whole entirely different level. This was a feature that would ultimately capture the hearts of millions of gamers from all over the world and made Halo a franchise which left all others in the dust. The rise of Halo wasn't coming. It was already here and bringing with it an unstoppable momentum. Happy Friday, folks. It's the Tyrant here, and today we are finally reaching the incredible climax of our beloved Halo franchise. If you couldn't guess by the thumbnail image, today's main focus is on the one and only Halo 3. At this point in the series, it had been 6 years since the saga began, and 3 since the last time we saw the Master Chief while telling us he was going to finish the fight. I mean, think about that for a second. If you had to wait 3 whole years to find out who Negan killed on The Walking Dead, there would be rioting in the streets. Leading up to the release of Halo 3, we weren't exactly sure what to expect. I mean, sure, we already knew the graphics were going to look a lot better, but how is this going to be better than Halo 2? As the release date approached, Bungie began dropping documentaries on the production of the game. We learned that the power-armored brutes would be replacing the elites, and there would be a new brute cache of weapons and vehicles including the Spiker, the Mauler, my favorite all-time weapon, the Gravity Hammer, as well as vehicles like the Prowler, and my favorite vehicle, the Brute Chopper. We learned of the new concept of heavy support weapons like the chain gun, the missile pod, the plasma cannon, and the kick-ass flamethrower. And to add even further to the arsenal, there were now 4 grenade types, with the spike grenade and the firebomb making their official debuts. The humans finally get a flying vehicle to counter the Banshee called the Hornet, and even a mobile base we now know as the Elephant. And of course, one of the certainly more interesting concepts we learned about was equipment. Similar to power-ups like active camouflage and overshield, equipment was to be a one-time use concept. The main difference, however, is that unlike standard power-ups, they needed to be used strategically. They could hurt you as much as benefit you if they were used in the wrong place at the wrong time. Take for instance the power drain. Yes, it could decimate enemy shielding and even EMP vehicles, but if deployed too soon, it could do the same to you. Same with the regenerator. If you deployed it in the middle of a firefight, your opponent would stand to benefit from it just as much as you. This served to add a new and interesting strategic dynamic that would become unique only to Halo 3. But they weren't done yet. A magic thing called theater mode was introduced. We can now fast forward, rewind, or even stop time in any campaign or multiplayer game we played. I still couldn't quite wrap my mind around that one, especially when they talked about a free roam camera option, but time would tell. And it certainly wouldn't be the only thing that I couldn't wrap my mind around. Of course, I'm talking about Forge mode. I mean, think about it. The ability to manipulate maps and create new ones was something that sounded so absolutely amazing that my narrow-minded self just couldn't understand how it would work. Would we have some sort of god cam where we would be looking down on the world? Or would it be some sort of direct interaction? Of course, we later learned that it was a simple, interactive, seemingly all-powerful monitor that would allow us to make all the manipulations we needed, but the idea was so new to me. At the time, it just seemed so impossible to even fathom. But the icing on the cake for me personally was the announcement of online co-op. Up until this point, most Halo fans deemed this to be impossible due to how the campaigns were coded, and that there was no way the same campaign could link up the same way on multiple consoles. Not only did Bungie prove these people wrong, they one-upped even that and implemented a 4-player co-op system which featured 4 unique characters, allowing up to 4 people at once to play the campaign together on Xbox Live. But the best things we had to experience weren't even fully realized until we actually got to play it for the first time, and were able to step into this living, breathing world with graphics polished to perfection, and getting to see our 2 heroes, the Master Chief and the Arbiter, fighting side by side against a common enemy. It became instantly realized that Bungie had blended the best of both worlds of Halo and Halo 2 together perfectly. Once again, we had large, open maps with tons of options, just like in the first game, with the classic bouncy physics to top it all off, but with the awesome new features and weapons that were added in Halo 2. This was what Halo felt like it was always meant to be. They had learned from the mistakes of their previous game, most notably with the concept of boss battles. Rather than implementing creatures with universe-breaking mechanics, the concept of the AI-controlled scarab was introduced. But even as threatening as these towering monstrosities were, they could still be defeated by conventional means, and man, who didn't receive a sudden rush of adrenaline and satisfaction? One of them blew up in a blinding flash of light. And the multiplayer, oh, it never felt so good. Halo 3 created its own iconic maps that soon became fan favorites. You had maps like Valhalla, which served as a spiritual successor to Blood Gulch, the epic map Guardian, and my personal favorite Halo 3 original map Construct, as well as so many others. But they made sure to include fan favorites from previous games, like Lockout and Midship from Halo 2, of course remade to better fit the Halo 3 tone, and of course my favorite all-time Halo map, Avalanche, which served as a reimagining of my previously favorite map, Sidewinder, from Halo Combat Evolved. This was true fan service to the max. But there was still so much more. Achievements were added both in campaign and multiplayer in order to allow players to set and obtain certain goals for themselves, a major feature that further added to Halo 3's replay value. And of course, there was one more thing. The thing that put my very self on the map as a Halo player. The ability to collect game-manipulating skulls throughout the campaign and permanently retain them for future use. When used all together on Legendary, we called this Mythic difficulty. This was a difficulty in which I created alongside my dedicated community that Bungie officially praised and even implemented as challenges in later titles. This even carried over to later games in the form of achievements and items you could unlock for your avatar. This was the power of the community and Bungie's dedication to its satisfaction. This was only further showcased in the form of the Bungie.net file share system, which allowed players to share their custom maps, game types, screenshots, and film clips to the entire community via Xbox Live or their very own website. And yet there was still more to come. As time went on and YouTube became more and more of a sensation, Bungie realized that the community had an increasingly desired hunger to share their experiences outside of Bungie.net as well. You see, at the time, capture cards were not only expensive, but they also required very powerful PCs in order to be run successfully. So what did Bungie do? They implemented their own in-house rendering service where, for a small fee, they would render your videos for you. From there, folks could either choose to play them back directly on the website, or they could download them and upload them to other media outlets like YouTube. If there was one thing that made Halo 3 stand out the most, it was the visible relationship that Bungie had with the community and the way the community grew and flourished. There was once a time when you could sit at your computer looking at the Halo 3 forum on Bungie.net, refresh the page just a mere couple of minutes later, and all of the topics would be different. Why? Because that's how many people were surfing the forum at any given time. That's how big the community was and how active each and every member made themselves. That's how much they cared, and that's how much Bungie cared. Halo 3 served as a culmination of years and years of hard work and fan service, with each game being bigger and better than the last. This was truly Halo at its finest, not only in terms of the game itself, but also in the way the community worked together and communicated with each other alongside its favorite team of game developers. But, like all good things, they eventually come to an end. As Isaac Newton once said, what goes up must come down. Halo 3 would be the final game that only served to refine and add to the classic Halo experience we had all come to know and love. The last game that served to only add and never subtract from a gaming experience that defined a generation. Halo 3 marked the highest peak of Bungie's Halo empire. Selling over 12 million copies worldwide, Halo 3 was the most successful Halo game of all time. However, Halo 3 was not the last Halo game created by Bungie. Yet when many legacy Halo fans are asked, what went wrong with Halo? They immediately lash out at the current owners of the Halo franchise, 343 Industries. Hey guys, it's the Tyrant here, and today we continue Halo the Rise and Fall with what may be the most controversial point in the series: when the decline of Halo truly began. Now before I move forward on this, and before you decide to hit that dislike button, and please don't, this video and the ones that follow from here on out are not reviews of the Halo games, nor am I saying that anything after Halo 3 should be considered bad. All I'm doing here is presenting you with facts. Whether you choose to believe it or not, after Halo 3, the series began moving in a different direction. In determining if the games after Halo 3 were good or not isn't something that I will be determining in this series, since how good or bad a Halo game is purely subjective, and I can't actually tell you whether a Halo game is good or not. It's up to you, the player. But if you remember in my last video, I stated that Halo 3 was the final game that only served to add and never subtract from a well-established franchise, and that is 100% true. And that's what Bungie's first mistake was moving beyond Halo 3. So let's take a second to look at the game that was next in line for Bungie, Halo 3 ODST. This may very well be one of my favorite games in the series, however this was the first Halo game that really stirred up any major controversy. You see, the main problem wasn't truly the game itself, but rather how it was marketed and sold. By today's standards, Halo 3 ODST would be considered an expansion, not a standalone game, and most likely would have been Xbox Live DLC set to a price between $20 to $30. However, in 2009, when the game was first released, it was marketed as a full game and sold at the price of one, $60. So let's take a step back for a second and define what most of us considered to be a full Halo game at the time. First off, a standard Halo game consists of a campaign that lasts between 5 to 7 hours of gameplay. However, Halo 3 ODST's campaign was just over 3.5 hours long, while also using the exact same models and engine as Halo 3. Again, the story itself was amazing. We got to experience the game from multiple perspectives and even got to choose the order of some of the missions via the game's main nighttime hub world of New Mombasa. But each mission, with the exception of the last two, was usually only about 10 minutes long. Alright, so time spent on the campaign was an issue, but what else makes a Halo game? For most players, the other half of a Halo game is its multiplayer. However, Halo 3 ODST lacked this aspect of a Halo game entirely. Sure, we'll take a second to acknowledge that the game did come up with a separate disc containing all of the maps from Halo 3, both original and downloadable content, and even gave us 3 new ones. And even though it was a smart idea on Bungie's part not to create an entirely new multiplayer experience to take away from Halo 3's current population, as well as hurt the next game, we still have to acknowledge that this was sold as a full Halo game without the standards that we usually are set to being one. Firefight, a new mode introduced in Halo 3 ODST that allowed players to fight endless waves of enemies, was without a doubt one of the best new features of the game, and to this day remains to be what many consider the most iconic firefight experience in Halo. And while I personally very much enjoyed ODST's firefight mode, this was all you really had to play other than the uncharacteristically short campaign. The precedent set by previous Halo games, especially with all the features added in Halo 3, made ODST feel like a lesser game. One more marketing nitpick I had applies directly to Bungie.net itself. Remember when I mentioned in the last video that one of the things that made Halo 3 stand out the most was the overall community involvement? This was fairly easy considering we all had a central place to meet up and discuss our favorite Halo game, the Halo 3 forum on Bungie.net. But once ODST was released, an entirely new forum was created for it. While some might argue this was a good move, it did have a noticeable impact on the numbers in the Halo 3 forum. Arguably, the ODST forum should have just been a part of the Halo 3 forum, since they both fell under the Halo 3 umbrella. But again, this was just something minor I noticed during the transition process. Alright, enough about the marketing aspect. Let's talk about the gameplay. As you recall, I stated that Halo 3 was the last game to never remove any major features. ODST, however, was the first game to do exactly this. Remove previously established features that we'd all become accustomed to. Now at this point, I feel like I need to address that going into this, some of these changes were inherently accepted due to the nature of the game itself. We already knew right out of the box that we wouldn't be playing a super soldier this time around, and even as badass as ODSTs are, they're still just ordinary humans, and the game was set up to reflect that. On top of that, many of ODST's scenarios versus traditional Halo games were designed to be more stealth-like rather than guns blazing. The new silenced weapons made that very clear, along with the often dark and dreary environments that oftentimes required the player to utilize the new visor mode feature. But this also meant the removal of one of the most iconic weapons in the Halo games, the battle rifle. Even with the extreme effectiveness of the silenced pistol in ODST, this was a very noticeable change that annoyed many Halo players who were used to the steady bullet spread and well-rounded utility of the weapon. But that wasn't all. This was the first time that dual wielding had been removed as a feature entirely since Halo Combat Evolved. Even if it was a feature you, the player, only used occasionally, not having it around at all just felt weird. It's like living in a home with a dishwasher, and one day it isn't there anymore. Sure, you don't technically need it, but it can save you a lot of time and trouble, and overall it can be a very useful thing to have around, especially in certain scenarios. Similar to the way regenerating shields and health were traded in for stamina and health packs, it's not necessarily that this made the game bad, but it was definitely something that we, the players, had to get used to after always having them around for the past 5 years. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we, the players, came to accept this for the simple reason that we weren't playing a Spartan this time around. We were playing an ODST, a normal human. But many of these features didn't just disappear for the duration of Halo 3 ODST. They stayed gone. That brings us to the final Halo game produced by Bungie, Halo Reach. This game is uniquely interesting in that you can ask a wide range of Halo players how they feel about Reach and read multiple reviews from websites across the internet, and opinions can vary wildly. Many people think this was the perfect swan song to Bungie's Halo universe, while others feel this was a major setback compared to the previous Halo installments, especially Halo 3. Now again, this video isn't set to determine whether or not Halo Reach is a good or bad game, or even a good or bad Halo game. All we're doing here is showing you how Bungie used this game to take Halo into a different direction, and it did. Halo Reach borrowed at least a couple of items of interest from Halo 3 ODST, despite the fact that we were once again playing Spartans. Now, lore-wise, you can argue that we were dealing with Spartan 3s, not Spartan 2s like the Master Chief, and I'd agree with you if future Halo games had actually brought back the concept of dual wielding, but they didn't. As in Halo 3 ODST, dual wielding was completely absent from the game, and once again, players were required to rely on health packs to retain their full strength, thereby slowing down the overall gameplay. After getting used to the previous system, this just felt off. We also saw the removal of what we had come to see as standard weapons like the Covenant Carbine and the Beam Rifle, along with brute weapons and vehicles that had previously been introduced. They had been replaced with more unique weapons like the Needle Rifle and the Focus Rifle, and whether or not this was an improvement is 100% on you individually as the player. Personally, I enjoyed seeing less copies of weapons and having more unique tools at our disposal, but it doesn't change the fact that it felt like a pretty drastic change from what we were used to. But one of the more drastic changes fell to the art style and level designs. Up until this point, we never really viewed Halo as a realistic shooter game. It was always borderline cartoony, and that was part of its charm. Now, you may automatically associate that with the grunts, and that's certainly true, but even the menacing brutes and elites could be just as comical as they were intimidating. Halo Reach set out to give Halo a more realistic tone. The weapons were now a lot less sci-fi caricatures and more painted with a more realistic, gritty tone. The aliens, especially the elites, felt more stiff and less lifelike and alien-like than ever. And rather than the bright color palette we had grown accustomed to in previous Halo games, here the tone was much more matted and dreary. And look at the level design. Halo 3 reintroduced us to large, vast environments similar to what we experienced in Halo Combat Evolved, along with epic battles fighting alongside entire platoons of your fellow UNSC allies. But not only were the missions in Halo Reach generally much smaller in size and felt more scripted, finding allies to fight with you was an experience that was generally hard to come by as opposed to previous Halo games. You'd think with a planet like Reach getting attacked by the Covenant, we'd be seeing the biggest, most epic battles ever witnessed in a Halo game. And that brings us to my next point. Halo Reach was the first game to completely break what we had always thought was canon to the franchise and further confuse players about Reach and its place in the Halo universe. You see, up until this point, everything we knew about Reach we read in the book Halo: The Fall of Reach by Eric Nyland. And up until Halo Reach, we thought all of the books were supposed to be canon to the Halo universe and only served to expand an already amazing story. But several plot points of Halo Reach, including the Covenant arriving earlier than we thought, the complete lack of a UNSC space fleet, and more jarringly, the presence of Cortana towards the end of the game, which completely derailed our current understanding of Reach, its importance in the Halo universe, and whether or not we could even trust the material outside of the games at all. It brought a sense of betrayal. When the conflicting plot points were brought to Bungie's attention by the fans, originally they stated that the books were in fact not canon until they later re-released Eric Nyland's The Fall of Reach to incorporate some of the retcons brought on by the game. This was a major slap in the face for longtime Halo fans. But it wasn't the only confusing aspect of Reach. It was the first and only game to have campaign, multiplayer, and firefight all on one disc, as well as matchmaking for all three modes. And on the surface, that sounds pretty amazing, and in many ways it was. However, nearly all of the initial firefight and multiplayer maps were ripped directly from campaign. Those that weren't were created in Forge World, a gigantic Forge map created so that fans could let their creativity run wild. And that should have been for the fans, not the developers. As a result, there was very little variation from one mode to the next. Now I'm going to present you with a challenge. I want you to think of one of the first 3 Halo games and name at least 3 of your favorite multiplayer maps. It's easy, right? Each map had its own unique style and setting to the point where many maps were remade for other games. They became fan favorites. What comes to mind when you think of Halo Combat Evolved? You're probably thinking of maps like Blood Gulch, Sidewinder, Battle Creek, and Hang 'em High. What about Halo 2? Coagulation, Lockout, Midship, and Headlong, right? Okay, now Halo 3. Valhalla, Last Resort, The Pit, and of course my favorite map, Avalanche. Now let's try this with Halo Reach. Reach's version of Blood Gulch? Now apparently the true name of that map is called Hemorrhage, but I actually had to look that up before making this video. It isn't as easy for Reach as it is for the other games, is it? That should tell you something. I'm not saying that Reach's maps were bad, I'm just saying it seems lazy, doesn't it? Like, not as much effort went into making the game? That it didn't receive the same love and attention to detail that was given to the other games? And it wasn't just the maps either, it was the way they were played. Equipment from Halo 3 was botched in favor of the new armor ability system. This may have caused the biggest stir in the community. Jetpacks and Sprint felt completely alien when it came to Halo, no pun intended there. Or at least that felt like the case back then. And armor lock? Yeah. No matter which side of that argument you take, be prepared to fight off an entire army of people who think you are flat out wrong. On top of that, a lot of the game types included the concept of loadouts, which almost entirely removed the concept of classic map control that we all knew and loved. And whether you like this particular feature or not, you could no longer be an elite multiplayer, with of course the exception of the invasion game type, and even then, it all depended on which side you were on. And that's when I realized something that hadn't really crossed my mind before. All the way up to Halo 3, one of the main ways you could tell just how important and how much of an impact Halo was came in the way of how other games tried to copy it. I mean, think about it. Once Halo became a global sensation, more games began using the 2-weapon system, faction-based enemies, and worked harder to create more driving plots for their games. Halo was a trendsetter, and it really wasn't until the days of Halo 3 that Halo began to have any real competition. But by the time Halo Reach rolled around, things began moving in the other direction. Halo began borrowing concepts from other games instead of creating their own. This was perhaps the biggest and most jarring turning point in the series. Halo was beginning to lose ground to other games. I guess that's what happens when you build such a successful brand for yourself. People see it, study it, and perfect it. And once they have, it allows them more freedom for innovation and new and awesome things to incorporate into the gaming world. It's not easy to think of Reach that way, is it? I mean, this was supposed to be Bungie's swan song to the fans, and maybe in their own way it was. Maybe letting up on the reins a bit allowed an easier transition for 343 Industries, giving them lots of options to improve the Halo Reach experience. And they did. They gave us a classic playlist that featured no more armor abilities or loadouts, and included several different remakes of classic maps from previous Halo games. It made Reach feel more like Halo again. And whether all this was intentional or not, that's an answer I don't have and may never have. But one thing is for certain, this is a major turning point for the Halo franchise. For better or worse, Halo was changing, adapting to the world around it. It went from feeling like an industry leader and pioneer to slowly beginning to blend in with the rest of the crowd. And while I also believe that these issues could have been addressed in the future, what happened to Halo over the course of ODST and Reach was far from being the most devastating. Halo Reach was perhaps the most divisive game among legacy Halo players. It's the game that began moving the series in a different direction rather than continuing to build on top of an already solid foundation. For many players, this was a welcome change of pace, but for many others, it was a change that made the game move further away from Halo and more into the generic sci-fi first-person shooter. But while much of the community even today remains divided on the progress of Halo Reach, it was far from being the most dividing and devastating thing to ever happen to Halo. And now, it's time we face this cataclysmic event head on. Hey guys, it's the Tyrant here, continuing with Halo the Rise and Fall. And I want to pose a question to you. Yes, you, the person watching this video right now. If you consider yourself a longtime Halo fan who isn't happy with the current state of the franchise, who or what do you blame? Is it an individual feature? Is it the direction of the story? Now I'm going to do a magic trick. I'm going to read your mind. Let's see, right now you're thinking of 343 Industries taking over Halo! Alright, now even you have to admit that for most people, their minds were just blown, right? In 2011, a decade-long partnership between Bungie Studios and Microsoft came to an end. This is an event we've come to know as the Great Halo Schism. This was the event that forever divided a vast community of decade-long dedicated fans. As for why this occurred, the on-the-surface reason is that there were creative differences between Bungie and Microsoft. Those differences mainly revolved around the direction Bungie wanted to go, and that direction wasn't Halo. In fact, we don't even truly know if Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach were really supposed to happen. This wasn't a sudden occurrence, this had been brewing for quite some time. Halo 3 was supposed to be the game where we finished the fight. But Microsoft put the smackdown on that idea and said, no, you owe us at least 2 more Halo games, and after that you can go your own way, but Halo stays with us. We don't even really know if Bungie wanted to suspend the concept of Halo indefinitely. Maybe they just wanted to put Halo on a hiatus for a while they tried something new. Regardless, Halo was Microsoft's baby, and they weren't about to let it fall to the wayside. The community was left in a complete daze. Where do you go from here? What do you do? Who do you follow? Do you follow the game that brought you to Bungie? Or do you follow Bungie that brought the game to you? And this didn't just impact individual fans. There were several other communities within the Halo community who felt the immediate blow. They had just lost their biggest supporter, and it was devastating. For my own community, I had been building it for over 3 years before Bungie handed Halo over to Microsoft, and the Mythic community depended on Bungie to help us spread the word to Halo fans about how to get the most out of their campaign experience. YouTube views plummeted, the number of Mythic completionists dropped, and the enthusiasm began slipping away. Now I know what you're thinking. Of course that's all you care about, Tyrant, your own community. Not at all. What happened to the Mythic community was happening to many others as well. Maybe they were a community you felt close to and followed regularly. Think of communities like Ready Up Live led by Greenskull, or the 405th, the King of Halo Cosplay, or even the Griffball community. We all felt a sense of loss, and those of us who led those communities, and many of us that still do, did our best to keep our communities together and move forward. 343 Industries, a company created by Microsoft for the sole purpose of creating Halo content, arrived on the scene to assume the role of responsibility, extending a warm hand to community leaders and fans alike from across the board, myself included. And it wasn't like these were new kids on the block or people completely alien to the concept of Halo. These were real Halo fans. Some of them were even former Bungie employees, but it didn't change the fact that it was still not Bungie, the company that we had come to know and love over the past decade, and for some folks, even longer. It felt like your parents had just gotten divorced, and now someone new was stepping into the picture. And this wasn't even an evil step-parent either. 343 Industries made it clear from the get-go that they were there for us and only served to make us happy. They needed us just as much as we needed them to continue carrying on the Halo torch. But sometimes when that step-parent enters the picture, that also means moving day isn't too far off. Bungie.net had served as a home for Halo fans for 10 years, and simply packing up and moving to an entirely new website with an entirely new layout was a jarring effect. As a result, many Halo fans continued to stick with the Bungie.net forums, and you know what? Some never left. None of us were really sure what the right decision was. Maybe leaving Bungie and Halo well enough alone was the right way to go. Maybe letting Bungie keep the rights to Halo would have been the better move, even if it meant the series was placed on hold for a bit while Bungie worked on other games. Or even if other Halo games were never to come. At least the community could move forward together. we'd all still be in one place, but that's not what happened. The schism occurred, and both parties were left to pick up the pieces. And 343 worked tirelessly to please the Halo fan base with the promise of a remastered Halo Combat Evolved, and even adding in 7 classic multiplayer maps to Halo Reach. And even I have to admit, one of their greatest achievements was what they did to Halo Reach. They carefully listened to the concerns of the fans and did their best to address them. They created fresh new maps for Halo Reach's multiplayer, with many of them being vast and beautiful, and they even improved firefight mode by adding larger maps, returning us to the original Halo ring, and even adding in friendly AI to join in on the madness. And once Halo Anniversary was released, they added a classic-style playlist that allowed players to experience Halo Reach without the new armor abilities and loadouts, while still being able to enjoy the modern graphics and game engine. They listened, and they cared. They understood what the community was going through and did everything they could to help soften the blow. But in the end, it was still up to the fans, and many of them chose to abandon Halo in favor of Bungie. The damage was done, and there was no going back. It's been over 5 years since the split actually occurred, but the memory of Bungie is still in the minds of many. It's true, though, that an entirely new community has developed around 343 Industries since then. Some of these new faces never even knew the world of Bungie or how inclusive it always felt. They never knew what it was like to know that while you were surfing the forums, posting, and making connections with other fans in the community, Bungie was right there with you every step of the way. They were listening. They were watching over all of us and determined to give us a gaming experience that could never be matched by any other brand or company. Halo wasn't just a phenomenon, and it wasn't just Bungie's either. It belonged to all of us. The road ahead wasn't going to be an easy one. 343 knew they had some pretty gargantuan shoes to fill, and while they knew they could never be Bungie, they were still determined to let us know that Halo was still in good hands. With the Halo community now in shattered ruins following the great Halo schism between Bungie and Microsoft, it was now up to 343 Industries to help pick up the pieces and rebuild, dealing with the aftermath head on. But they would soon learn that they were about to fight an impossible battle, a battle that could never be truly won. Hey guys, it's the Tyrant here, and today we're continuing our journey through the rise and fall of Halo. When we left off last time, Bungie and Microsoft had officially gone their separate ways, and the members of the Halo community weren't sure who to follow. Do they stick with Bungie and support their next project, hoping it would be bigger and better than Halo? Or do they follow Halo, since for many of them, it's how they found Bungie to begin with? 343 began reaching out to community leaders from across the board, myself included, as they showcased their very first game since taking charge. A game they thought would help soften the blow and make the community feel more at home, and dubbed it a gift to the fans. Of course, I'm talking about Halo Anniversary, a game created to celebrate 10 years of Halo. This was a game every Halo fan was looking forward to, and the idea behind it was certainly a good one. The concept was to take the original game and leave everything unchanged except for one thing: the graphics. At this point, Halo was 10 years old, and 343 wanted to give it a good buff and shine, making it look like an Xbox 360 game while still feeling like the original. Online co-op would be added, something the original game never had, and there would even be skulls and terminals for players to find. To sweeten the deal even further, classic maps would be remade and playable for Halo Reach. Sounds great, right? But was it? The game was released and immediately met with mixed reviews. Now, I will give serious credit to the graphical updates that were given to their environments. Simply put, they looked amazing. The dynamic lighting had been improved, and even the soundtrack had received an upgrade, which could be toggled on and off anytime the player wished. But the overall execution was still a bit off. The people and aliens hadn't really received any major updates at all, but rather were taken from previous Halo titles, mainly Halo 3 and Halo Reach. It's because of this that the cutscenes with either Captain Keyes or Cortana always felt a bit off, like they really didn't belong there.
But I've isolated approach signatures for multiple CCS-class battle groups. Make it 3 capital ships per group. And in about 90 seconds, they'll be all over us.
Well, that's it then. Bring the ship back up to Combat Alert Alpha. I want everyone at their stations.
Everyone, sir?
Everyone. And Cortana. Let's give our old friends a warm welcome.
I've already begun.
And the elite zealots? Up until Halo Reach, Zealots were always thought to be gold in color. However, in Halo Reach, Zealots were made a completely different subclass entirely. The gold ones were now referred to as Generals. Halo Anniversary, however, made the mistake of porting over what Halo Reach made out to be Zealots, so there were no gold elites in Halo Anniversary, at least not with the updated graphics switched on. And while the soundtrack was indeed beautiful, more often than not the volume was cranked up so loud you could barely hear the character dialogue. It's hard to say for sure exactly how something like that could be glossed over when it seems like it's a pretty basic skill even for most known YouTubers. And the co-op? While it was certainly a good idea in theory, the lag in each game was unbearable. Even with a high-speed internet connection, just being able to complete a mission with someone else was almost near impossible. And while previous Halo games weren't always necessarily perfect in that field, they were still generally more stable. So all in all, the idea was there, and sure, maybe it's the thought that counts, but overall the execution could have been much better. Alright, so the first game was a swing and a miss, but luckily 343 had a chance to redeem themselves with their very first Halo title built entirely by them from the ground up. In 2012, we saw the release of Halo 4, and if 343 had one major component on their side for this game, it was the build-up. We'd be back in the boots of the Master Chief for the first time since the end of Halo 3, and I can guarantee you that there wasn't a single person who saw Halo 3's legendary ending and didn't want to know what happens next. This was 343's chance to show the community what they could really do. Prior to the game's release, all we really knew was that the events of Halo 4 were set to take place directly after the legendary events of Halo 3. We knew we'd be landing on a mysterious Forerunner shield world, and that we'd be encountering a brand new race of creatures. This would be the first time since Halo Combat Evolved that we'd been introduced to an entirely new faction of enemies. Then the game was released in November of 2012, 2 years after Halo Reach and a year sooner than most major Halo titles, which was typically about 3 years. We were all so excited to be playing the Master Chief again, and 343 made it clear from the get-go that they'd be doing everything they could to legitimately make you feel like you were in the Mark 6 armor. And on that aspect of the game, they delivered. You actually felt like you were the Master Chief, even though this also included the questionable QuickTime events. And it helped that the graphics for Halo 4 were so out of this world. Combined with the physics engine, this may very well be the most realistic looking Halo we have ever seen to date. And while some folks had mixed feelings about this, especially with the grunts now looking and even sounding like miniature mountain trolls from Lord of the Rings, the attention to detail was most definitely impressive. Even the soundtrack was amazing. I mean, sure, it wasn't Marty O'Donnell, but it still had such epic tone, and it matched every game scenario perfectly. This was a game where, in many ways, 343 tried to play it safe. And while they did take some obvious risks, we'll get to those in a bit. But the first thing that needs to be pointed out is the Covenant. Since in the past, aliens like the Brutes, the Drones, the Skirmishers, and the Engineers had received mixed reviews from fans, 343 decided to approach the issue with a classic touch by only including the original 4 species we encountered in Halo Combat Evolved. And given how the Covenant were actually presented in the game, I think it's pretty safe to say that they made the right call. And with them came the return of the classic weapons palette. We saw the return of both the Covenant Carbine and the Beam Rifle for the Covenant side, and we saw both the Battle Rifle and the DMR for the humans. In fact, the only real dramatic change we saw with the classic weapons was trading out the Plasma Rifle for the new Storm Rifle, even though it served pretty much the same general functionality. The vehicles were also kept mostly classic, with the Covenant having the Ghost, the Wraith, and the Banshee, while the humans had the Warthog, the Scorpion tank, and the brand new mech vehicle called the Mantis, and yes, I love that thing. And while armor abilities were still carried over from Halo Reach, at least this time around they didn't feel shoehorned into the game, and they felt more useful in general. Even the story itself was fairly solid. It grabbed your attention right from the get-go with the situation happening on the Forerunner Dawn, then suddenly getting tractor beamed into the Forerunner shield world. And if that ending didn't make you shed a tear, you aren't even human.
Wait.
Welcome home, John.
That stuff was all well and good and made the game entertaining and memorable. But then there were the risks. The biggest risk here was the introduction of the Prometheans, a race of semi-sentient robots that were put in place to guard the shield world Requiem. And while there were only 3 distinct types, and they all worked really well together, none of them were really fun to fight. The masses of crawlers usually just took the place of drones when it came to just mainly slowing the game down. They weren't fun so much as they were annoying. And the knights? Don't even get me started there. We're talking about hulking enemies with shields, can't be headshotted due to their face armor, can use nearly any Promethean weapon including the power weapons, and have a vast array of magical abilities that further give them the advantage on the battlefield. I mean, sure, maybe as bosses they could have worked, but they were everywhere in the game. Believe it or not, the most interesting Promethean enemy to me was the Watcher. I mean, sure, they were annoying, but take away their ability to spawn in crawlers, defend other Prometheans with an energy shield, and, resurrect down allies. Okay, that's an oddball. Basically, they serve the purpose I always thought the drones were supposed to have. And as far as the multiplayer goes, it doesn't help that most of the maps felt completely uninspiring, but with the return of loadouts, ordnance drops, and armor abilities, it didn't help that we now had a third faction of weapons on the table. I mean, they weren't really anything overly new or exciting as much as they were just a different flavor of the same concept. Add in the concept of sprint now being a standard feature for every player, and suddenly Halo starts feeling less like Halo. It's no wonder we saw MLG drop Halo from their competitive gameplay. But the big takeaway from this goes back to something I've echoed repeatedly throughout this series. The worst thing you can do to a Halo game is start taking good features away. Halo 4 didn't just do that to one feature either, it did it to several. Co-op was reduced from 4 players down to 2, theater mode was completely botched from campaign, and Firefight was dropped in favor of the new episodic Spartan Ops campaign. And don't get me wrong, while Spartan Ops in and of itself was entertaining in the sense that it felt like Firefight with objectives, having the option to customize your own Firefight experience should have been there too, just like it was in the 2 previous games. Halo 4 is a game I typically refer to as a missed opportunity. They were on the right track in so many ways, but the delivery ultimately fell short of the expectation of longtime Halo fans. Don't get me wrong, the game was definitely fun, but it still wasn't great, and it makes me wonder if they really should have just taken that extra year to give it a better polish and make it more up to the standards of the Halo community. Even members of my own community, some who had been with us for years, were so disappointed by the overall delivery of Halo 4, they didn't even bother purchasing an Xbox One to play future Halo games with. That should tell you something. But still, Microsoft continued to push forward, determined to stick to their goal of releasing a new Halo game every year. Next, they decided to home in on mobile devices and release the 2 games Halo Spartan Assault and Halo Spartan Strike. Now, for the record, these games were released 2 years apart from each other, but the premise is still basically the same. The player would have a top-down scenario of the battlefield and would basically stick control their way through 30 missions, usually about 5 minutes long, to achieve victory. Now, I want to be clear here and note that both of these games are a lot of fun to play and are certainly some of the best games you can get for your mobile device. Both campaigns are each roughly 2.5 to 3 hours long and feature amazing graphics and soundtracks. And this would all be fine and dandy if Halo was actually in the mobile business, but for most Halo fans, myself included, these were seen as side projects at best. Filler content between games, if you will. So many fans didn't take the game seriously, despite them being well worth their $5 price tags. These games seem like an afterthought and a way for players to stay busy and spend more money up until the release of the next major Halo title. It personally took me over 3 years before I finally decided to give Spartan Assault the full Tyrant try, and again, even though I loved it, the fact that even a dedicated Halo fan like myself just couldn't muster up the interest to play it when it was first released definitely says something, and a lot of people felt that way. Microsoft was beginning to run out of runway at this point, so they decided to give the anniversary concept another go and released Halo the Master Chief Collection. Their plan was to bring almost every major Halo title over to the Xbox One, put most of its focus on a Halo 2 anniversary which would be included in the bundle, and even add in the game's very own multiplayer. It was pretty much clear right out of the box that they'd learned from at least some of their mistakes from Halo Anniversary, and by that I mean they actually started creating their own new models for its Halo 2 equivalent, rather than stealing them from other Halo titles. And the pre-rendered cutscenes created by Blur were beyond epic, almost to the point of setting a completely new standard for Halo in general. But for all that, the final product was still a commercial failure for Microsoft, with most of its issues revolving around the multiplayer experience. Playing it was nearly impossible, with most players having to wait in in-game lobbies for extreme periods of time before finally finding a game, and some players never even got to play at all. Now eventually most of these issues were fixed, and we even received a Halo 3 ODST add-on for it, but by then the damage was done. Players were already turned off by the initial experience and were seeking entertainment elsewhere, with many of them turning to Bungie's brand new sci-fi shooter experience, Destiny. It's no wonder we won't be seeing a Halo 3 anniversary. And for more information on that statement, I'll post links in the description below. The odds were now stacked against Microsoft. They were trying so hard to kick Halo into high gear that they forgot that quantity isn't always better than quality. And that's really where Bungie games differed when you stop and think about it. I mean, sure, there was a 3-year waiting period between games, but when the game was finally released, you felt that that's really all you needed. It was 3 years well spent. So much care and attention went into each and every one of their titles that we didn't need filler games to keep us busy until the next game was released. The game we had in front of us was already well more than good enough to keep us busy for years at a time. Now it feels more like Halo's been put on an assembly line, and that's not the way it should be. It's not that 343 doesn't care about Halo or their fans. They clearly do, and I can see it from everything they've done. And they're trying to do what's in the best interest of the fans, or at least what they think is in their best interest, but they're also stuck between a rock and a hard place. Halo isn't the only player on the table anymore, and with the demands of constant releases and deadlines from their parent company Microsoft, as well as having to confront an army of Halo fans who believe 343 will never live up to Bungie, the company is in a gridlock, a standstill. How do you find a solution to a seemingly unsolvable problem? Had Halo 4 been the final major Halo game in the Master Chief story arc, I would have been perfectly satisfied. With Cortana no longer in the picture, and with the appearance of every major threat in the galaxy either eliminated or on the run, Master Chief could finally retire from a lifelong career serving the UNSC. But 343 Industries was still determined to deliver that perfect Halo title, the one that would finally earn them the title of the true keepers of the Halo Flame. But would Halo 5 Guardians live up to that challenge? Or would the Halo Flame finally be extinguished? Hey guys, it's the Tyrant here. In October of 2015, 343 Industries launched their second major AAA Halo title, Halo 5 Guardians. Leading up to its release, fans were treated to an ARG titled Hunt the Truth, pitting the Master Chief against a brand new soldier, Spartan Locke. From first appearances, we're given the impression that Locke is some sort of bounty hunter who's out to get the Chief, and we're left completely in the dark on who's in the wrong here. The premise seems interesting, while also being questionable at the same time. Could our favorite series icon really be on the run from the UNSC? And if so, why? What could possibly drive the Master Chief into going rogue? This seems like a major sidestep from traditional Halo. And when the game was finally released, that couldn't have been more true, despite the ARG seemingly having very little to do with the actual campaign itself. It's hard to say exactly what 343 was truly aiming for here. Now, I'm going to take a second and state that I already have a review of Halo 5 on this site, and I'll post a link in the description below, so we're only going to focus on the main points here. Like with Halo 4, Halo 5 Guardians improved on a number of things from its predecessor, while also completely tanking in other areas. The campaign itself was a mixed bag. On a positive note, the Promethean faction received a massive overhaul, and this was definitely a major plus. Promethean Knights are no longer the unstoppable alien juggernauts appearing around every corner. This time around, we saw them far less in the game, their quote-unquote superpowers had been drastically nerfed compared to Halo 4, and they were also given weak points this time around, making them far more easier to take down. The Prometheans themselves finally received a middle-class creature, the Soldier, and even the Crawlers this time around weren't so pesky to battle, only having to deal with a few at a time, rather than entire swarms of them bringing the entire game to a grinding halt. Promethean weapons had also been redesigned to make them more unique, rather than having them simply be carbon copies of different weapons with just a different flavor. The game mechanics themselves had also received a massive buff, with armor abilities finally being a thing of the past, and replaced by a universal thruster pack capable of allowing players to dash, plow through walls, and deliver deadly attacks from above. Even weapons now felt more useful, with most of them having the iron sight capability, and also sprint was now unlimited. And while the concept of sprint remains to be a dividing feature among Halo fans, at least this time around, we didn't have to be concerned about the timing of it. Overall map designs both in multiplayer and campaign were larger and gave a much bigger sense of freedom. The squad system had also been added, giving the player the opportunity to fight side by side with 3 other Spartans while you, the player, were pushed up against extreme numbers of enemies and bosses. So, for all that, why did this story have to be so terrible? Let's start with just the beginning. Right off the bat from the first mission, we learned that the Prometheans are still a major threat, despite the Didact supposedly being defeated in the previous game. With both the Didact and the Composer being gone, why are they here? How did they get here? Who's leading them? And why doesn't this seem to be a top concern for our characters? And the characters. Within 2 missions, we are introduced to a whopping cast of 8 that makes up both Blue Team and Fire Team Osiris. On the Blue Team front, we learn that the Master Chief is reunited with his lifelong Spartan brother and his 2 sisters. But how the hell did they get there? Where have they been all this time? And why are they just now showing up? And before I go into this further, yes, I realize that most of these questions were answered in media outside of the game, and that's one of the huge problems this game has, relying too much on outside content. I want to make it abundantly clear that while having an expanded universe is fine and even encouraged, when you have to rely on a series of books and movies just to understand the basics on what's going on in a video game, that's not okay. Not everyone who plays video games wants to take the time to read in a seemingly endless series of books that may or may not be canon, let alone spend the extra money. A game should always feel complete, not like you're missing a huge chunk of the story. And it's not like every other Halo game is perfect in this regard. I mean, don't get me wrong. In Halo 2, we never found out how Sergeant Johnson returned alive from the Halo ring, despite Cortana claiming that she and the Master Chief were the only ones left at the end of the first Halo game. We never learned how Johnson and Keyes beat the Master Chief back to Earth from Delta Halo, even though the game makes it seem like the Master Chief left first. And we never learned what role that engineer played in Halo 3 ODST when it came to the actual Covenant human war. The story sort of dead ends after that. So don't get me wrong, gaps in the story are definitely there, assuming you're only playing the games, but it has never been so jarring as it was in Halo 5 Guardians. And let's take a second to acknowledge the fact that Halo 5 featured 8 main characters this time around.
Confirmed.
Were they trying to make a Halo game or a Roland Emmerich movie? We never get to know any of them really, and even though we're at least familiar with Spartan Buck, he's made a side character instead of heading up Fire Team Osiris. We don't even get a decent monologue from him explaining why he went from being an ODST to a Spartan. And as you're going through the game itself, I noticed that even though the missions themselves are bigger in size in terms of the overall environments, none of the battles ever felt like something new or different. Move a few feet, fight a new wave of enemies. Move a few more feet, fight a new wave of enemies. Hell, by the time I got to the mission The Breaking, I realized how similar it was to the library in Halo Combat Evolved. You're fighting endless waves of enemies that aren't even really alive, and individually have nothing to gain or lose from fighting you. Nothing. If anything, I found The Breaking more tedious than the library simply because your enemies just keep warping in out of nowhere. By the time I was done with the game's 15th mission, I felt like this had to have been the longest Halo game on record. I was expecting at least a 10-hour upload from my full campaign and cutscenes video. It was only 5 hours long. A game that was 5 hours long felt like 10. That's how badly these missions dragged on. And when you finally make it to the end of the campaign, you find out it was all for nothing. No major changes occurred because of you. No major character developments. The Master Chief and Spartan Locke simply shake hands, while Cortana gains control over the Guardians and begins policing the galaxy. If Master Chief had simply not gotten involved at all, and the same goes for Spartan Locke, the outcome would have been the same. And thus brings the conclusion to a one-act game with no character development at all. How sad is that? After slogging your way through 15 missions, that's the conclusion we get? Even Halo 2 had a more satisfying ending. At least there we saw the Arbiter realize the truth about the Halo rings and form an alliance with his longtime enemies, the humans. What was achieved in Halo 5? I find it generally destabilizing that 343 could do so much right for Halo 5 in terms of the new features and mechanics, yet still fail so miserably when it came to the overall delivery of the story. I honestly believe here that they were simply trying to make Halo 5 bigger than it could be. You're constantly jumping around from one place to the next with a squad of folks you barely even care about. I feel like there was a lot more that was supposed to be there, but ultimately they had to cut it short for time. And that really couldn't have been more evident than when it came to the initial bare bones release of the game itself. No Forge, only a few modes to choose from in multiplayer, and a disappointing campaign. Now, if you fast forward a year, yes, they have added a ton of awesome things into Halo 5 Guardians. We now have Warzone Firefight, which is a game mode I have been having a blast with throughout this entire series, and even different degrees of difficulty that you can experiment with. We've got new enemies, new vehicles and vehicles variants, giving us access to by far the largest arsenal of toys we've ever had in a Halo game. And now we also have the most expansive and most powerful Forge we've ever seen that's not only available to play on Xbox One, but also we can finally forge on our own PCs using Windows 10. Halo 5 Guardians has come so far in the last year, which is why it's such a complete and total tragedy that the initial release was so under par for a Halo game. Had Microsoft been willing to put off the release of Halo 5 for another year, they could have not only had all of those new features built in from the get-go, but they could have also focused on building a more complete and satisfying campaign. These are just some of the things that they need to take to heart when it comes to their next major Halo title, and fortunately, they're still in the building phase. Anything can still be changed, and nothing is concrete. That doesn't just include the gameplay and features, but also the story. When I envisioned where Bungie would have gone with Halo, I picture a game very similar to Destiny. A game with a vast, expansive universe that can be explored and can continue to grow over time. I mean, think about it a sec. Really think about it. Halo is built on a vast, incredible universe with so many places we have yet to see. So many experiences that we have yet to feel. We still have at least 6 other Halo rings out there, and we know from their holograms in Halo 3 that they all contain very different environments and landscapes. Wouldn't it be cool if you could visit all of them? Or how about another alien homeworld? We've already seen Sanghelios, but what about the Grunt homeworld? Or the Jackals? Or maybe even a new species entirely? Perhaps we could even visit another Forerunner structure, or their other Shield worlds, or maybe even return to the Ark like we are supposed to, at least in Halo Wars 2. And don't forget, per the end of Halo 5 Guardians, even the UNSC has tons of planetary colony worlds that we can explore. And rather than being a game that's simply released and left as is, expansions could be released over time to introduce additional stories, missions, and scenarios to continue expanding on the Halo universe, rather than just having one little campaign released every 3 years or so. And this would also give players a chance to create their own story by finding different avenues and different missions that could vary from playthrough to playthrough, giving the game near infinite replay value. And if you really think about it, it's totally possible. Just look at where they're already going with Halo and how many comparisons we can draw to Destiny. Especially with Halo 5 introducing larger environments with way more enemies and even your own squad to help you out. You wouldn't even have to embark on these journeys alone. You could go co-op with friends, or you could play solo and perhaps even switch between players. Now, for the record, I wouldn't include things like leveling or grinding. Creating your own adventure should be less tedious and more centered around exploration and creating your own story. And don't worry, multiplayer fans, I haven't left you out either. The game could basically divide it into 2 modes, PvE and PvP. PvE players could be treated to a vast, new, and ongoing Halo experience, while PvP players could face off in classic multiplayer matches like Arena, Capture the Flag, Warzone, and even Firefight, both new and classic. And for the record, as rec packs are making their way more and more into the mainstream, even those could work in this new Halo game. Gaining access to awesome new weapons and vehicles via rec packs is fine, but in the future, these are things that need to be earned solely in-game rather than being based only on the size of the player's wallet. I dubbed this quote-unquote Dalo hybrid Halo Reclamation. The next Halo game has the chance to become the definitive Halo game, and one that can last and continuously impress and entertain Halo fans for years and years to come. The track record for 343 at this point has been questionable. We know damn well that these are folks who love Halo and love their fans equally, and we can't fault them for giving it their best, but at the end of the day, they still aren't Bungie either. This is their chance to show the world what they can really do, and what Halo really means to the world. The next Halo game can't just be legendary or mythic, it needs to be everlasting. It needs to make a permanent mark in not only the gaming universe, but more specifically, the Halo universe. So this officially concludes my series on the rise and fall of Halo. And this isn't just an ordinary series on my site. This is a series I wanted to dedicate to both the fans and 343 Industries alike. This is a series I wanted us to all learn from and to help us understand what made Halo so immersive to begin with and how to keep the legend alive for years and even decades to come. And I can't just do this on my own. If you enjoyed this series and feel that this could very well be your ticket to the next perfect Halo game, I need you to help me spread the word. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, because the only way we can make the changes we need to happen actually happen is to get this conversation started. We need the entire world to hear it. And I want to take the time to thank everyone who took their own time to hear it, to hear the message, and hope that it inspires you. Today, we conclude a saga that traveled through the entire history of Halo, past, present, and future. Where it started, how it grew, the troubles it faced, where it is now, and where it could go. I want to thank each and every one of you so much for joining me on this journey every step of the way. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope this series gave you a bit more insight on the progression of the Halo franchise, and hopefully it gives you inspiration leaning towards its future. And as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.